Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to be talking about another episode from season 7. This is episode 12, The Boosters. The Boosters was written by Robert Pirosh and directed by Harry Harris. In this episode, they are starting a boosters committee on Walton's Mountain to help just enhance the community and look towards expansion. They're still in the war, but they're feeling like there's so much activity going on because of like the defense plant at Pickett's and other things that are potentially coming into the community, and they feel that this is an opportunity to expand upon other sorts of infrastructure for the community. Early in the episode, you see us all in the front yard kind of playing some sort of a ball game, throwing the ball back and forth, stuff like that. And then Mama and Daddy come back from, it seems like they've been on some sort of a business trip in Richmond that Mama has gone along on. And she's just looking absolutely beautiful. We didn't often see Olivia with her hair down up until around season 7, but she just looks very stunning, and Elizabeth comments on that. And then, Olivia says, oh, well, I better go back inside and put my apron back on, because Elizabeth sort of says, you don't look like yourself. But a lot of the trouble is prompted by, once again, John and Ben. Ben is once more fighting against the fact that he's working with John. He's supposed to be sort of a partner, but John doesn't trust him to make decisions. And Ben made some sort of a decision that for a contract with someone who is like one of their subcontractors, who then isn't able to fulfill it. And so this was causing some trouble. So John's very upset. So is Ben. And once again, Ben is looking at leaving and going out and getting some other sort of work or doing his own ventures. While at Ike's, putting gas in his car, they notice that there's a lot of traffic, and we never really saw traffic going by Ike's store, but they're saying because of Pickett's defense plant that there's just a lot more traffic going back and forth. And so Ben says, oh, well, what they should do is open an auto court. And so Ike talks to Corabeth, and Corabeth thinks it's crass and too lowbrow. But then when Ike talks about the fact that there could be money in it, and also Corabeth starts seeing the opportunity, rather than what she considers a tacky auto court, to do little guest cottages, and that it could somehow be more elegant, which is much more to her liking. And Ben is going to go back and discuss with Daddy the possibility of him being involved. John doesn't like the idea. He thinks it's not going to sustain itself, and that it's too much of a risk, and that he doesn't know that business. He knows the lumber business, and so he doesn't feel comfortable getting involved in a venture that he is not familiar with. A few times in this episode, my attention was drawn to these fabulous backdrops that were painted by the scenic art departments. In this case, you see Yancey arrive at the house, and we are in the front yard. So this is an exterior set. As Yancey comes up and enters the living room, we're clearly in the living room, which means we're on the soundstage. But you see just in this moment where the backdrop that is on the soundstage outside the front door looks like the front yard. And they did just such a fabulous job. You didn't always see much of those backdrops. I noticed it again later in the episode when they're in Ike's store and you see outside Ike's store. So I'll point that one out to you here shortly. And in that case, the one at Ike's store, I felt did not, to me, reflect what you would normally see when you were outside of Ike's store. There seemed to be too many trees too close up, but sometimes they do what they feel is visually something that works best when you can see some of those just backdrops, so that they aren't distracting in terms of it not being the actual outdoors. This was where I had I saw that view out of the window of Godsy's store to the outside. Now we didn't when certain episodes were done, like when we did the Ferris wheel and the Ferris wheel was in that area, when we did the prize, when the sort of little fair was right there. We've seen that area outside of Godsy's store, and there is some distance between the front of Godsy's store and then some rocks over on the other side. That was not what this backdrop here looks like. But again, your attention isn't designed to be specifically studying that backdrop. I just notice it because I know it's a backdrop. Yancey has come because he wanted to talk to Ben, but Ben's not there. And so he talks with Jason and tells him that he's basically taking a correspondence course to become a barber and that he needs people to practice on. And then they're supposed to take before and after pictures, and he sends those in, and that's how he gets his grade about whether or not he passes. Well, Jason isn't willing to pay for a haircut. He doesn't trust Yancey, and understandably, we know Yancey, and so I don't know that I'd trust Yancey, although then I should be one to talk because I'm the one that turned Jim Bob's hair pink. But anyway, so then he starts offering to pay Jason he'll pay Jason if Jason lets him work on his hair, but Jason sort of says for now he's going to pass. A little later, we do see Yancey giving Jim Bob a haircut in the barn, and we see Chance and Blue are both there. And then a little bit later, we also see he's going to give Elizabeth an egg shampoo. And so at one point he does pour this egg on Elizabeth's hair, and it just reminded me that sometimes as actors, we end up with these really, that's not a lot of fun to have egg poured on you, but so we can find ourselves in scenes where, things are going to happen that aren't going to be a lot of fun, like whether it's getting hosed, hit with a hose, like in The Genius when I sprayed the hose on him, and then when he pours water on me. So those types of things happen, or having to get into the cold Drusilla's pond when the water is cold and it's not all that warm out, or whether you end up in mud or shooting rain sequences when you're soaking wet. So sometimes the life of an actor is not the most glamorous or comfortable of occupations to be engaged in. And this one with the egg being poured on Elizabeth, obviously, once they've done that, it's a kind of a one take kind of scene, because you'd have to go back and clean her all up and clean her hair and all of that and dry her off and stuff like that. So that's the type of thing that they would want to get in one take. Ben has decided he wants to pursue this auto court thing, and Ike Corbeth, she has this idea about they're creating a town square outside of Godsy's store, and she wants to have a fountain there. And so they have all these ideas, and Ben's trying to get Daddy to go along because he feels like if he could get a loan, but he's underage, so he needs someone to sign. And John says he won't do it because he doesn't believe in it. Olivia is kind of trying to help Ben out because she feels like, he needs to let Ben try things, and, if he fails, he fails. But, Ben's just, he wants to strike out. He wants to make his own mark, and he feels that Daddy is just kind of holding him back. So he does proceed, and he's able to get a loan. I think John does sign it with the bank, and then they have a boosters meeting, and the Baldwin sisters are there, and they say that for this town square that the land belongs to the Baldwins, and so they're interested in buying it from them. And so they have a conversation, and they agree that they will gift the land for this. So they're off and rolling. Ben has a conversation with Zuleika because he has moved out of the house and he's living at the boarding house, and Zuleika is all for the expansion and thinking then she'll have more business as well. And so he is gathering a lot of people in town who think this is a good idea because it will bring more commerce to the community, and people can see that, that'll bring money to the community, which is a good thing. So John does come to that boosters meeting and basically says that there have been other towns building auto courts and they've gone bust. And so he doesn't feel like he can back this idea because he doesn't think it's going to end up being viable. But a vote is taken and the majority say yes, they want to proceed. So they are on their way. As Cora Beth is sharing an article that was in the paper that she basically provided to the paper, but all of a sudden, Ben and Ike can see the other side of the paper, and it's basically saying that the War Department is not approving any non-essential war construction. So they are now in a position of what are they going to do, because they were going to build these little cottages and stuff, and so they feel like because there's a defense plant and Jason has said he heard rumor that there's going to be another factory or something that's coming, a steel factory coming into town. And so they feel like they maybe can sell it as essential construction to accommodate those people that are going to be coming to work in those places. He gets word back that basically it hasn't been approved. They're not going to be able to do new construction. But then Ben gets the idea that perhaps they could move existing little cottages, that when the Guthrie's mine didn't pan out, that he had these little cottages that if they moved them and just spruced them up, it's not new construction. So that's going to be their plan, and they are once more back in business. A couple of things that struck me here is with this newspaper, that had to be created. So likely it was the prop department that was responsible for creating that, and they would have to, whether that was printed, typed, however they would have created that newspaper. That wasn't an existing newspaper. So that was up to the prop department to create something that looked like what the newspaper should look like. I also thought it was interesting that Ike talked about having this sort of vision or dream about having sort of a superstore, like a grocery store, where people would go up and down the aisles with a cart and pull things off the shelves and stuff, and very much like what we all now know of as grocery stores. After all his hard work, Yancey does indeed get his diploma. He has passed getting his barber's license, and in honor of that, Ike sort of does the little ceremony and gives Yancey his diploma, and then they uncover that they have a barber chair there for him, and he's immediately looking for customers, and everybody sort of makes themselves scarce. So despite the fact that he now has his license to cut hair, nobody's quite yet willing to jump in and pay for it. Jason comes to Ben and lets him know that he has found out that the information about the steel mill coming to town was actually just a rumor that was started to build up the price of land around the area. So Ben is very disappointed to find out this isn't the case. There is now another boosters committee meeting, and a lot of people are now wanting to throw Ben under the bus and say, that they want their money back, or they're going to not honor their investment commitments. And at first the Baldwin sisters say that they now want their land to be paid for. And in this case, John comes to this meeting again, and he really sort of stands up and supports Ben and talks about, how the vision that he had and how he sees all of this, and that there is an idea, and that perhaps it'll be a different vision, but there is this opportunity that they have these buildings. They've moved a couple of these little houses now, and the idea of what these could be, and that there's an opportunity for businesses and for people. And as John talks, and John talking about his belief in Ben, that Ben will see this through and be responsible for this. And so people start to get the idea that, and John's very clever because he says, well, then I guess that would mean that if Ben is kind of handling all of the investment, then, Ben will get all of the profits. Is that correct? And so he gets people thinking about, if they don't invest, they won't get a share of the profits. And John is painting a picture about how there's going to be profits from these businesses. So people do decide that they're going to go ahead and honor their investment commitments. And so a town square will be built. And so we do see that then at the end of the episode. And Ben and John have sort of made up, and Ben is going to come back as his partner, but still do continue to do work to help build up this town square. And we see what's happened. They've built the kind of boardwalk that goes around, and a sweet shot. I always love these moving shots where, in this case, the camera follows Elizabeth, who has these balloons that she's taking around to the different businesses. And so the camera is able to track with Elizabeth as she goes and hands off balloons to different businesses, and ends up finally around where Cora is by this fountain, which is really just kind of a drinking fountain. And Elizabeth takes a drink, which then to me said, anytime things like that happen, if you see a light that turns on, or you see a water fountain that actually you see water come out of, that would be what we would call something that was practical. So it could actually be used, as opposed to a fountain that was just for show, that we never actually see water coming out of it. But as soon as you see that water's coming out of it, then they somehow have to rig it so that, whether it's a hose, probably a hose line that was brought in, and some sort of a pump system, or turn it on hard enough and it'll come up. So they would do something to make that a practical water fountain so that scene could be done. Besides the Walton family in this episode, we once again saw Ronnie Claire and Joe back as Ike and Cora. We saw the Baldwin sisters, Helen Cleve and Mary Jackson. Robert Donner was in this episode once again as Yancey Tucker. Pearl Shear back as Zuleika Dunbar. And then in the scene where there's one of the booster committee meetings, there's two men who each have a line, and they're sitting sort of in the front row. That is Lynn Storr and Glenn Hodgins, who were two of our regular stand-ins. And so frequently they would be given something like this when they just needed, a line, or they needed a waiter, or they needed somebody to do some little bit there. So in this case, they each had a line. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons as I touch on the episode The Boosters from season 7. I'll be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons, more of your questions in another Ask Judy, and hopefully some more special guests soon. Thanks for watching.